The Darkness Within is a really interesting story. This was written by Lisa Stone. It was released in 2017 and it's published by Avon. And this is, I think, the fourth or fifth Lisa Stone book that I've read. Needless to say, I definitely recommend them. And it's pretty good. There are two things I didn't like, one of which I think actually ruins the story a little bit, one of which is just room for improvement, but they are spoilers, so I will discuss those at the end. Otherwise, this will be spoiler free. And this is about a character called Jacob who gets an organ transplant. He gets a heart transplant. And we learn that he's a very likable individual. But after the transplant, he starts to become nasty. And when I say nasty, he's one of the best written evil characters I've ever read. The character writing here is incredible. It's quite unusual. It's not that it never happens, but it's unusual to follow so much of an antagonist's journey where we're blending the line between protagonist and antagonist because he is at the forefront of a lot of the story. And that means that we're seeing this through his evil, twisted eyes. He really does become that sinister. And that's kind of fascinating and really interesting. As I said, it's not as if no novels do that, but usually when you have a story with a strong antagonist like that, they are appearing every couple of chapters at the most. But he's right throughout this, and I found him to be a really interesting, very well written character. Now, this is the bit where I think it won't be for everybody, and I completely understand that because while the book does heavily go into this idea that you could take on the personality of the person who donated the organ, this is not something that's scientifically proven in any sense. So it's not going to be for everybody, but I did find it to be a really interesting concept, and I think for the most part, it explored it really well. There is, as I said, one thing that I think ruined that part of the narrative and made it seem too unrealistic, too unbelievable. And I will discuss that with a spoiler warning in a bit. But for the most part, I thought it was interesting, and the character of Jacob was just so brilliantly written and so disturbing. It was also progressive as well. It's not like he had the heart transplant, went to bed, woke up, and was evil. It's a lot slower than that. Not too slow, but slow enough that one could, if you bought into this theory, believe what was happening. And I don't want to spoil exactly what happens or how it escalates because I don't want to give it away, but I was really impressed with the pacing, very, very impressed with the writing of this character. Sometimes it was very uncomfortable to read because we are seeing things through his perspective, and that's unpleasant, but it's so well done that I have nothing but praise for the way that character was handled. We do have some other perspectives, largely his mother, who begins to worry about her son's changing personality. And that's how we start to approach the idea of taking on the personality of the organ donor because she begins to look into this. And there are some very convincing arguments, I have to say, and it is very fascinating. But again, it's not going to be for everybody because if you prefer something that's 100% scientifically proven, then I understand that. But as a concept, it's really interesting, and I think the subject is handled very well. And as a narrative, for the most part, it's very, very well written. The pacing is brilliant. The characters are well written, particularly as I've gone on about Jacob. And ultimately, I really thoroughly enjoyed it. If you've never read any Lisa Stone books, although it wouldn't be my first choice, I'd say it is a decent enough place to start if it really sounds like it would appeal to you. It's not my favourite, but it is very well done. And of course, if you have read any Lisa Stone before, then it is certainly worth checking out. So, two spoilers now. One is, well, actually, they're probably both quite big spoilers. So, these are big spoilers for things that happen. And one, I think, ruined the potential believability of the narrative. The other one is just room for improvement. That one I can deal with very quickly. The ending was incredibly rushed, very, very, very rushed. And I felt a little bit disappointed by that, but not so much that it affected my enjoyment of the rest of the novel. The other thing is the fact that Jacob starts to date, if you can believe this, starts to date the former girlfriend of the organ donor. He didn't know this. He had no idea, and neither did she, because Jacob doesn't know where the organ came from, where the heart came from, and the girlfriend doesn't know that her partner was dead, which I feel like is unbelievable because he was living with her. Without going into too much detail, the organ donor was living with her and was driving her car and crashed it and then died a couple of days later. And I feel like the police would have at least informed her of that. So I don't believe that she didn't know he was dead. And also, the fact that it's an incredible coincidence that Jacob just so happened to receive the heart of this woman's ex-partner and then find her randomly. I think if I remember rightly, it was in a bank. It was in a bank, and then start to date her. And I think date is maybe the wrong word once you see what his behavior is like. But that is so unbelievable. And because we're having to buy into this whole taking on the personality of the donor, that in itself is quite far fetched. But then you throw in the fact that he just happens to be with that person's girlfriend. It's too unbelievable, and that made it completely difficult to buy into the situation. Before that, I was believing it the way things were explained. I thought, yeah, I can see this happening. I don't know if I actually believe it could happen, but within the context of the novel, things made sense. But when that happened, I thought you're trying too hard to make this ludicrous. And there's no need for it either. He didn't have to be with her. It could have been any random woman that he started dating, and it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever. So that was a little bit ridiculous. And honestly, I don't know why an editor didn't look at that and go, you've crossed over the line and made this unrealistic. Too unrealistic to buy into. So that did ruin it a little bit, but the rest of it, and again, mostly with the writing of Jacob, was so strong that I was able to look past that and continue enjoying the majority of the novel. So that is worth bearing in mind that if you do read it, granted I've just spoiled that for you, but if you are still listening to me and you plan on reading it, it's not perfect, but the good bits are so good that it's worth persevering with the rest of it. And ultimately, I thought The Darkness Within was a really good book and one I'm very happy to recommend.